In the podcast today, I'm talking to Max Sather. Max and I met through some commercial opportunity a year and a half ago. In that commercial opportunity, we talked about the world of psychological safety. And I say commercial opportunity because it was because of a paying client that we came together. But what we soon realized is the thing that bonded us was this world of purpose and building an organization where people are truly engaged. So in the conversation we're about to have, which could have gone on for a lot longer, mind, we talk a lot about purpose, psychological safety, building organizations, and also the stories we can go and tell that really bring an organization to life and fully engage people. Max shares some really significant points for us around how to build an organization which actually truly values people. So listen out for his 3 points and look at what you might need to do in your organization to bring those alive. And also think how those 3 points can help you build a better family life if that's appropriate for you, where you can engage younger people of any age in the journey they're on to give them the feeling that their voice is really heard and truly they can reflect their emotions. I love this conversation and I look forward to doing it again because there's a power in what we talk here. It tells the story of who we are. It builds a picture of what purpose can really do and how when we put purpose first, we can truly build an organization that's commercially successful. But guess what? The return of investment is massive in terms of what we do for society, what we do for community, and what we do for the people who work with us. Enjoy the show. And as always, let me know what we can do to help you, even if it's just a conversation. I always say that we can't hold you to account. What we can do is help you on the journey to do things differently. Because it's only when we do things differently, we can truly change the world. And actually, that's what we're all setting out to do, making a dent in the universe, as Steve once said. So please let me know your thoughts. Let me know who else this conversation to go to. But primarily, enjoy the show. Welcome back to the Sparks by Ignium podcast. I'm Phil Rhodes, your host, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Max Sather. Max and I met over a year ago through a client relationship. And over that time, Max and I had a number of conversations, centering on a number of things, including psychological safety, organizational design, talent, and various other things related to the world of purpose. Max himself combines team coaching, leadership development, organizational design to develop organizations that are really capable of responding to the complexity and uncertainty of today's 21st century. He's got clients including Porsche, Adidas, Bayer, Chanel, and Novartis. He's spoken at numerous conferences around the world, in New York specifically, and in Barcelona. And the UK, he's based in UK, out of Cambridge, with 2 sons, and spends what little time he has trying to get better at woodworking. That might be something we pick up on when we talk about the world of purpose. But Max, welcome to the Spark Baby podcast.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks for having me on.
One of the questions we talked about beforehand was about how you got into this, and I'd love to pick up on that because we could go on lots of different avenues on this. But I'd love to go back to 2012 and about how did you get into this work of doing what you do? What's the story behind that?
Yeah, so after I left university, I kind of bopped around various different industries, trying to figure out what was right for me. And finally, in 2012, I moved to New York and I landed my dream job making violent video games. Now, my NDA from this time is thicker than the Bible, so I can't tell you exactly which game it was, but just think about the one violent video game you've heard of, the one you don't want your kids to play. It was that one.
Yeah.
So obviously I was tremendously excited by this, and got straight to work. And I soon realized that the violence in the video game, the nature of that experience, was reflected in the culture of the organization behind it.
Wow.
So yeah, what I mean by this is, for example, we were working like 60, 70, 80-hour weeks as routine. It was highly centralized. There was a complete lack of any kind of psychological safety. I saw leaders telling people to shush, literally shush like this in meetings. Yeah, it was pretty bad, very hierarchical and unsafe, I think is how I'd describe it. And this was this was a rough introduction to like the world of video games.
Yeah, that's interesting. So where did it go from there? Because once you discovered that and that cultural aspect, what happened next?
Yeah, so I got lucky. A producer joined from another video game company, and he was awesome. And he introduced us to this thing called Agile, um, and he actually gave me a book. I still remember that day. The book was called Scrum: The Art
I
of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time. Took the book
remember it.
home, read it in one sitting, and it offered a new system for teams to get things done, a new way of working that sort of broke through all of these um, issues around bureaucracy and lack of customer centricity.
Mm.
And I was really moved by it. And immediately we implemented it in our department, um, starting in one team and sort of growing it from there. And it worked really well. And as a result of that, I got promoted. I was soon leading a team of my peers. I was invited into more strategic conversations. I started telling other teams. We introduced new tech and tools to help enable it.
Wow.
It grew. It went really well from there, and I had a really exciting couple of years working on the game, making that happen.
Yeah.
Until one day, I said to my boss at the time, let's call him Vladimir. I said to Vladimir, hey, I think this has legs. I think we should start to introduce this outside of our department. Could I have a role where I start to coach other teams and other groups in this
Wow.
new way of operating? Look at the success we've had here. I'm sure it can make a difference elsewhere.
Mm.
And Vladimir, he said, no. He said, you will not change this organization.
Wow.
And all the like frustration and fatigue of that experience just bubbled up. And I went home and I had nothing short of a mental health crisis.
Mm.
And I came back to work on Monday and I just thought to myself, there has to be a better way.
Yeah. Yeah.
This isn't how it has to be. The success the organization had came at the expense of the humans within it.
Wow.
And
Wow.
that was a real turning point. And I eventually uh, I left shortly after that, and I set out to find a new way of organizing that put humans at the center of the experience,
Mm.
both internal and external to the organization. Found a great community online of people trying to do this. I met some wonderful people from a small consultancy called August, and I joined up with them, and we set out trying to change organizations for the better, not at the expense of profit, but in
Mm.
service of a greater purpose to advance culture, advance the conversation, and advance the way that we just get work done. We all spend, 40 or 50 hours a week. It might as well be something we enjoy and find meaning and purpose in. And I've been trying to do that ever since.
Yeah, I love that. And you said something else now. You said at the service of a greater purpose. I think, listeners of this podcast and clients that we work with and people we talk to, I think we have that in common in terms of finding a greater purpose. And I remember working on my purpose in about 2011. I remember sitting in a cafe in Kensington High Street, I think it was, with a lady called Suki. And we were talking about me and my purpose. And we spent a lot of time doing it, but it took me quite a long time till I realized what my purpose was. And I think the words around the fact that you don't discover your purpose discovers you, come to mind, because I realized what it was for me. But then over the next couple of years, I played with that word and what it meant for me, and I think I'm now really hooked on what my purpose is, and we might talk about that later. Um,
Mm.
but what does purpose mean to you? Because we all have different definitions about this. What does that word purpose really mean?
Yeah. I love that idea that your purpose finds you. That's definitely my experience. I think I didn't know that I needed purpose. I was just trying to get a paycheck,
Yeah.
right? But then when I found something that gave me intrinsic motivation to get up and get things done,
Yeah.
was when I knew I had purpose. I'm having a keyboard issue.
Nope.
Can you hear that?
I just heard a little click. That's all it was.
Yeah.
Mine.
Um, rewind.
Yeah. Purpose, intrinsic
Sorry.
motivation.
Yeah. I was just trying to get up and earn a paycheck week by week. But once I found purpose, I found that intrinsic motivation to actually make me want to make change happen in the world. And I feel like I knew the bigger why, like the kind of North Star, the calling, the reason for being. And it fit with me, my personality, my childhood experiences. Then that really was a huge lever for me in how I show up. So in answer to your question, for me, purpose is about it's about why. It's about why we do things. What's the dent we want to make in the universe?
Yeah, and it's really interesting because we often come back to that word, don't we? You know, the dent you make in the universe, and we come back to the Steve Jobs' word about what he said about purpose. And interesting, I've just resubscribed to Simon Sinek's organization for a second year running because there's lots of information on, and I'm not plugging his website, but there's lots of stuff there on his uh, website all on purpose, and that's where we all talk about the Simon Sinek podcast that's had millions of views, but it's all about that why. Start with why was what his book is about, and I think lots of people push back on that, but I believe it's true. I think you have to understand that word why before you can do things, and I think use that word intrinsic motivation. I think there's a big thing around that because we all know that it's only when you get that internal motivation that you're going to inspire yourself to do things. And really, I've just listened to a book called 4,000 Weeks. And interesting, in there, have you read it? That's interesting. Yeah, I've just finished it literally last week. And the bit that really struck me about that was not just about 4,000 weeks is about the average we all have around, but actually it's about how we all, when we look at what our purpose is, we can go about making changes in our lives to try delivering that. But it's all about that word choice. And I think that's the bit that I've often used in my coaching about choice. And I've had lots of pushback from people saying, well, I don't have a choice. But my view is you do have a choice, but you just have to work out what you need to drop to change things. And I think purpose is one of those things where once you get clear on your purpose and you understand what it is, you then can make choices in your life to help you align to whatever that thing is. And that's a big thing for me. And I think there's a lot that goes hand in hand with that word purpose and choice and that intrinsic motivation. So I love you said there.
That speaks directly to the work I do with organizations, which often starts with getting leaders to define the purpose, define the why. Because once the employee population understand that why, it gives them choices. It gives them the frame within which they can make decisions. So tell the leaders, this is an empowerment tool, right? You're giving them the boundaries within which they can make their own decisions, because as long as they are making decisions in service of that purpose, great, carry on. You don't need to come back to me for approval as the boss. So I love that idea that purpose creates choice.
Yeah. And interesting, you just said there, it's the frame in which they can make decisions and use it as an empowerment tool. And I think that's really powerful. And then reflecting back on your conversation with your boss, Vladimir, back in that violent video game manufacturer, you're not going to change the organization. And you made a choice to move on because you realized there was a lack of alignment and therefore it didn't fit with what you were. It would be really interesting to go back to that organization 12 years later and see what's happening in there if they still exist. It'd be interesting.
They're doing great. They're doing great. So, but they're doing great by one specific measure. And that specific measure is not a measure that I want to prioritize. I think there's a way of achieving revenue, achieving profit, achieving shareholder value through as a result, not an objective. Does that make sense? Like as a byproduct, not as a direct thing you're aiming for. And the thing you should be aiming for is purpose. It is culture, autonomy, like mastery, empowerment, engagement, and profit will come from that.
I talk from a coaching perspective. I talk about culture and commercial. And I often say to companies, you can invite us in to come and help you make your business more commercial. And it's simple, revenue up, cost down, just sweat the asset. But that's not what we do. We want to work on the cultural side of a business because we know that by building culture, you're going to deliver the commercial, but you're going to do better for society. You're going to build a better humankind. And I think that's the bit that I would work passionately on. And I just, over the last few years, I purposely go out to work with purpose-led businesses because that's what I believe is where the future is. There are some businesses who just want to work commercially, and that's okay. There's a place for them as well. I'm not stopping that. I want people to make money, but I want them to use money for doing good. Whether
Nice.
they're B Corp or something else, but either way, I want them to be able to do something that engages employees,
Yeah.
and makes a difference, or makes a dent in the universe.
Can I ask you a question on that point? Because something I often struggle with as an external advisor to a senior leader who is obsessed with keeping the business going is how to demonstrate a direct relationship between culture and the bottom line. It's
Yeah,
quite hard to draw a hard line there.
yeah,
So let's say they were working with a business focused leader. How would you go about making that relationship clear to them, making it obvious why they need to work on culture and how that will input what they're actually trying to
yeah.
achieve?
That's a really good question, actually. So I think there's two things. I think some leaders get it, and therefore they don't need persuading. Um,
Yeah.
Other leaders have got that view that they know there's something out there and they want to do something with it. Um, to me, I think there's a plethora of businesses have been commercially led, and there's a plethora of businesses have been culturally led. I come back to businesses like Patagonia. Um, Whatever you think of Patagonia as a business, I think there's something there about let my people go surfing. What is it about that business when Patagonia was set up? Is a climbing business to make climbing equipment, and it was built to make equipment for passionate people who wanted to be outdoors. And as that business evolved, the real thing was around, let's understand what it makes to be a real commercial business, but with a cultural basis. So I think
Mm.
there's a lot of stories there, and if you've not read the book, which I can't remember the name of, was thinking now, it's really worth reading that book about what the culture in Patagonia was all about. So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing I think is a lot of businesses who are commercially focused often have high staff attrition. They lose people.
Mm-hmm.
I'm back to that in terms of what's the productivity levels in the business, and my belief is that people come to work for one of two reasons. They either come to work for your money, and that's when you're just a commercial business, and they'll sell their services to someone else who offers them more money when they're ready, or they come to work with their hearts and minds and spirit, and therefore they
Mm.
want to be part of your business. And
Mm-hmm.
those are the people who stay in your business and really give their all. Um, and they're your A players because they buy into the values of the business and they produce
Mm-hmm.
good results. But it's a really
Mm-hmm.
nice place to work, and you get longer term people, you get less staff attrition, the cost of hires goes down, or the cost of mishires go down. Um, and I think that morale and that engagement drives innovation. And if you get
Mm-hmm.
innovation in the business, you can start uplifting your revenue, but people want to be passionately part of it.
Yeah.
I did a presentation actually last week on culture in business, and I quoted Peter Drucker from 2006. And I say quoted Peter Drucker because whether he said it or not is a different matter, but he said, culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yeah.
And it may have been taken out of contract, but he said this to Ford Motor Company at the time. And the principle there is, if you look at what he meant by that, was we can write great strategies in business, we can have great documents, but unless you get the culture right, people aren't going to align. And therefore, you're going to be like pushing water uphill. Whereas in nature, rivers run the course to the coast. They take the easy path. And I think
Yeah.
culture helps that happen. So I did a quick chat GPT session. I asked, tell me what the benefits of our culture are. And I've got some lovely statistics. Now they are chat GPT statistics, but there's some
But
great
who
stuff.
knows?
Yeah,
Yeah.
pardon?
So who knows if they're real or not?
Exactly, who knows? But one of the come out is, there's lots of things there about how you can increase revenue in the business, how you increase profitability, how you increase willingness to be part of it. Your glass door scores go up. So there's
Yeah.
lots of things that says if when people are aligned to a great purpose, they become part of the business. That's my view
Yeah.
on it. I need to go and do the research myself as well as the chat GPT. But hey, that was a good starting point. What's
Yeah.
your
Okay.
what do you think on that?
Oh, so the way that I might convince a senior leader about this is to tell my story, to tell the story
Yeah,
I told at the start. You talked about attrition and disengagement.
yeah,
Um, I was on a good path for that organization, and ultimately I left not because I was getting a very good paycheck. I left because of the culture. I left because I needed something else. And I think a lot about, like Dan Pink and drive, motivation. I think a lot about the cost of like talent retention and hiring, which is huge.
yeah,
The brain drain,
yeah,
the loss of institutional knowledge. And I think there's a lot of compelling arguments that you can make, but often finding a leader who understands this
yeah,
and who knows their role in the change, knows that they have to change as well, is one of the critical kind of first battles
yeah,
that we have to
yeah.
overcome when we go into an organization.
Yeah. So here's a thought. We've been through a more traumatic period in business since 2020, and you might say before that as well. If you think about the recession from 2007/8 through to 2013, 2014, we then went through the economy started to grow. Pandemic came along, so the world's been in turmoil, and I think one of the things that business leaders say is it's all very well you coming and talk about purpose and culture, but you know what? We just need to keep ourselves alive. We need to keep feeding the mouths that we've got, because actually it's a chaotic environment. So how do you
Mm-hmm.
confront that from a business perspective? That culture, in my view, culture takes time, but we need to make money
Mm-hmm.
today is the question we often get from people. How do you
Yeah,
confront this as an issue?
yeah, and it takes time and it takes investment. It takes real money to change a culture.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
Consultants don't come cheap, and how do you and that's going to impact the profit and the bonuses and the ability to hire and the wages as well.
yeah, yeah.
There's a, there's a story from a book called Reinventing Organizations by a guy called Frederick Laloux, which was the Bible for me as I started doing this work. And he explores purpose-driven organizations around the world and tries to find the patterns that others can learn from. There's one story, I forget the organization, but the organization, the company was facing a cash crunch,
Mm.
and they were going to have to find a way to reduce the wage bill. And the leader was faced with a choice. He could fire a few people in order to get back into the black, or he could ask the employees what they should do.
Yeah.
And so he held a town hall, he explained the situation, and he sourced feedback and ideas from the group of people affected. And the decision they made was to all reduce their wages so that
Wow.
everyone could remain employed until the company, righted the ship. And
Mm.
now this is a radical approach to leadership and to organization design. Because what this leader here is doing is he's designing systems within the organization, the wage structure. And instead of making those decisions in a closed room at the top
Yeah.
with a lack of transparency, making a decision that could affect engagement and morale, he's including many voices. He's sourcing collective intelligence
Mm.
to make a better decision for the purpose of the organization. And I think that's a fascinating example of the new mode of leadership, the new mode of management, and what leaders can do as an alternative to traditional kind of traditional ways of solving for that problem.
Mm. So one of the and I totally agree, and I love that sourcing and collective intelligence. One of the problems we often see when we're working with companies, and interesting, I was running a workshop I was running recently using Gustavo Rossetti's culture canvas, which I love as a template. And one of the words or one of the phrases on there is about psychological safety. And
Yeah.
often we see in businesses where um, the boss says, "Hey, we need to get your opinions on this. What do you think?" But people are afraid to speak up. And you and I have talked about psychological safety before. Um, So how do you create an environment where people feel able to put their voices across without fear of retribution? Because this is one of the big things that we've talked about before, but people,
Yeah.
political safety being banded around. But what's your thoughts on that for the audience
Yeah.
here?
It's funny, the start of what you said there reminded me of back at this organization I used to work for. Like, we'd have brainstorming sessions where people would throw out ideas and each one was just shot down by Vladimir. And eventually we just sat there in silence and waited for him to tell us what to do. So what kind of brainstorming is that? Because it wasn't an exploratory conversation. It was just like, who has the best idea? And if you put yourself in a situation where you're trying to reduce the wage bill of a whole organization and you're trying to include all voices, you need to listen across that network of people, take advantage of their individual experience of the organization, because we believe the people closest to the problem are often closest to the solution, right? And the people close to the problem are often the people on the execution side of the business, on the front lines, closest to the customer. They have the best data, so they probably have the best ideas on how to solve for that. So all as much to say is, if you are prepared to listen and include voices, you also need to create, as you say, an environment where those people will share up and share risky, probably some bad ideas, without the fear of repercussion, without fear that it's going to hurt their career prospects or future involvement in other conversations. So yeah, this is a critical idea in the new mode of organizing people at scale, in kind of self-organization, as opposed to hierarchy, because we want to listen to those voices. In answer to your question, how do you create that? There's no silver bullet. It's not easy. I've read a lot, or a big follower of the work of Amy Edmondson, Harvard professor, wrote several books on this. Just released a new one, The Right Kind of Wrong, about failure and smart risks and intelligent failure, and doing that thing that all leaders say they want, which is to fail fast, fail smart, and learn from that. But how do we really make that happen? How do we bring it to life? There are three strategies that Amy offers, and I'm going to try and remember them one by one off the top of my head. The first one is to set a learning frame on the problem, right? So leaders can set different types of frames as they face a challenge. I'll give you an example of a frame. Let's say this bottle of water, if I told you this was 90% fat-free, that sounds pretty good, pretty healthy. Well, I'll have some of that, 90% fat-free, pretty good. And then if I said, this bottle of water is 10% fat, same data, same information, I've just put a different frame around this bottle of water, which makes it much, much less. So a leader who wants to set a learning frame would say, look, we don't know what the right answer is here. We're moving through the darkness, and we don't know what's going to come out the other end. We just know we need to achieve this outcome. So let's learn as we go in order to get there. Setting a learning frame makes it very easy to fail, because failure becomes an opportunity to learn.
Lovely.
Oh my gosh. Sorry, that's my computer beeping again.
Yeah, I know that. No, that's his natural stuff that goes on.
Speaking of failure, my wife spilled water on my keyboard last night.
Oh no. I think I've had my computer problem this morning with Microsoft doing an update as well, so it keeps on my keyboard keeps on coming up with different information as we're talking here. We can edit this bit out, so don't worry.
Thanks. This is so weird.
I just heard a little pop as a noise. It doesn't come across too loudly. It's not obtrusive.
Okay. Well, this will give me a chance to bring up my notes on this, actually.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. I've not read The Right Kind of Wrong, but it sounds very interesting, so I need to go and look at that.
Yeah, it just came out a
Okay.
couple of weeks ago. So let me find this. There we go. Let's see. Okay, so setting a learning frame. Here are some mini scripts that leaders can use in order to set that up front. You could say something like, this is totally new territory for us, so I'm going to need your input and ideas. Right? Try to make it really easy to contribute.
Okay, like that.
This is complex stuff, so we will make mistakes. There are things we know and things we don't, and we need to figure it out together.
Yeah.
Right? Simple statements that set it up, create the tone, create the culture for psychological safety and for failure in an ongoing way.
I love that. I love the point there, you're just picking up on one of those sentences. This is complex stuff. We will make mistakes.
Yeah.
But that's okay. Because if we're going to
Yeah.
learn, we've got to make mistakes. Because if we don't make mistakes, we're not going to learn. And I love that just as a different frame.
And it's an inevitability. We will make mistakes. It's going to happen. So let's just get used to that idea.
Yeah.
And when we learn things, share it transparently so we can all benefit.
Yeah. And that's one of the biggest issues, isn't it? A lot of companies do not share mistakes transparently. In fact, I say literally that. A lot of people do not share mistakes transparently because they're not able to or not willing to. And it creates that tension in them because it stops them wanting to try things. That fear of failure, which we know is one of the things that holds most human beings back. And it comes from that fear of making a mistake. Whereas actually, when you start to see a mistake as just a learning process, that's okay.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to make mistakes, but then it's harder to have to talk about it with lots and lots of people, right?
Yeah,
It makes it even worse.
yeah.
So we have to make that okay.
So what comes next? What's the next? You said there were three key things there. What's the next thing
Yeah.
you? Yeah, so obviously setting that learning frame of the problem, key.
Second strategy is to invite participation. As a senior leader, make sure that all voices, all people have a chance to speak, and when they speak, they are heard. People actually listen to them. So, excuse me. I'm sure many of your listeners will have had the experience of being in a meeting, or this particularly happens in a remote world on conference calls, where the conversation in the room is dominated by one or two voices, and a few people in the room just say hello at the start of the call and then goodbye at the end of the call, nothing in between. And I always wonder what they're wondering, what they're thinking about. Those people, what ideas do they have that we're not benefiting from or hearing? What are we missing out on? What information do they have that we aren't learning from? And so something a leader can do is to invite participation from all voices in a conversation. To say something like, I notice we're hearing from just a few people. I want to invite other people to step up and take space.
It's interesting, isn't it? We're applying this to business, but actually any organization where there are more than two people in the room, you need to be able to apply these type of thinking. That's thinking, because you're not going to move anything forward unless you have that full participation. Setting up the right frame. I'm thinking about I did some work with our local parish council at some stage. You need to make sure more than one voice is heard. Otherwise, you just get that train of thought, and people often are not able or not willing or not capable of speaking up for one of a number of reasons. But actually, that thing about making sure everyone is heard, somebody's got to take responsibility for that if it's not the organizational norm.
Exactly. And it's one thing to get diverse voices at the table. It's another thing to have them all actually included. And the benefit that diversity. Tons of studies show that diverse teams make better decisions, but it only helps if we're actually hearing from them.
Yeah.
As they leave.
Love that. Okay. That's interesting, isn't it? So we've got setting the learning frame, inviting participation, getting people in there.
And then responding productively. When someone shares an idea, no matter how bad it is, say something like, interesting, tell me more. Easy, right? But what that does is, it does three things. It tells the person that although, even if this is a bad idea, in future, they are welcome to bring other ideas to the table, which might be better ones, which might be good ones. If someone's shot down in one conversation, in future conversations, they're going to hold back. They don't want that feeling again, even if they have a better idea in future. The other thing is, the idea itself might be bad, but the problem they're trying to solve for is one worth exploring. So you could like back up the train of thought a little bit and then take a divergent path to find a new idea which does solve for that problem. So that's why even the bad ideas are worth responding productively to, because of future benefit that they might hold. You're investing in that person. You're investing in what they have to say, which will pay off in future.
You know, the thought that's gone through my mind as you're thinking here is about children and how we raise children to be able to bring any idea forward. And you know, the theory I have, the story I talk about here is around, the child who goes to school and in years gone by, and I think a lot of schools are now changing, but the view was you just sat and listened. You weren't able to contribute. And then they come home to family and they don't feel they can put their ideas forward because dad or mum says, no, that's a bad idea. We can't do it like that. And it stops the conversation. With what you're saying there, just thinking about family, a learning frame, all ideas count, invite their participation, involving the children in that conversation. Just think what richness the conversation you can have around the dinner table if all kids of whatever age felt like they could contribute to the conversation. Just because you're 4 years old doesn't mean your ideas don't count.
Right. And the amount of parents with teenagers who are like, my teenager doesn't talk to me. I've got no idea what's going on with their lives. But that starts at an early age, right? Like, that book, How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk. My dad gave me that when I've got two boys, a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old. And it's amazing reading that and looking at the parallels between that and coaching. You're a coach, you know all about listening. And leadership, right? How to listen so that people will tell you the problems they're having in the organization. Like, I want my kid to come home and tell me when his best mate didn't play with him at lunchtime. And you have to really change your mode of being in order to build that trust, build that relationship, build that psychological safety, so that they tell you those stories.
I think
I'm not a master of it, by the way. I haven't perfected it by any means.
Don't worry, I've got an 18-year-old and a 21-year-old, and they'll probably tell you I'm definitely not a master at it. Interesting. I remember buying a book, and I can see it across my bookshelf now, by Edward de Bono, How Teach Your Child How to Think. And I remember reading that way before I had children, because there were some really good principles in there. And I think there's something there about allowing people to think, but also the bit that book doesn't talk about, which I think we do need to talk about more, is allowing people to feel as well. Because thinking is one thing, but allowing people to express the emotion of what's going on in an organization or in a family setting is so key as well. And I think when you're talking here about, creating psychological safety, part of that is, tell me what's going on, but tell me how you feel. That, I think, is a really powerful piece that's often forgotten, because we're such a thinking process here, whereas we're not catching the real feeling of what's going on for people, especially in an organization where, how many emails do we get today about, mental health at work? But let's capture that and allow people to speak up, which you said just now, you might get divergent thinking. Actually, divergent thinking is what you need. But you only get that when you're allowing people to really be who they are. And that's
Yeah.
the feeling and the emotional side. So I wonder whether, to me, that's a massive part that is often overlooked by people.
Yeah. I think the advice that I always give leaders who are focused more on the facts than the feelings is to say, like, emotions are data, which I sound like a robot when I say that. But what I mean is sometimes people might feel a reaction to an idea and not know why, not have good rational cause for that feeling, but there's just something about it which doesn't sit right, which
Mm.
is worth exploring. Maybe there's a DEI issue at the heart of
Yeah,
it
yeah,
that we can't put our finger on.
yeah. And
Maybe it's gonna stop someone bringing their whole self to
yeah.
work, which is important.
And do you know what I love about that? We often talk in English language about having a gut feel, but that gut feel is the instinct. And often, I think about myself. I'll go through something, and I had a gut feel about something, but I didn't speak up about it, or I didn't notice it, or I didn't pay attention to it. And then when
Mm.
I look back in hindsight and say, if only I'd listened to what was going on for me at the time, in hindsight, but actually here I am,
Yeah.
and I did listen. But actually having that for you to say, okay, this doesn't feel right, whatever it is, whether it's a
Oh yeah.
deal or something else. But that gut feel is what we need to pay
Yeah.
attention.
Yeah. We've all had that feeling.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
oh, I
yeah,
knew it.
yeah,
Knew
exactly.
it.
I knew it, exactly. Yeah, I think that's a. And look, we're talking about lots of things here, and I think there's loads of praise we can go here around this word of psychological safety about building purpose. Um, I'd love to just come back to your story again, in terms of where it goes, because obviously, in the words of someone many years ago, it's a never-ending story. Um, we tell stories in business to bring businesses alive, and purpose is often, and effectively, if I just say that, if we talk about culture, culture is built up around the stories we tell. So
Mm.
your violent video game company had a story to tell, and that
Mm.
story pervaded the beliefs, the traditions, the way we do things around here. But I wonder, how do we create stories in business that are slightly different? Because if I've been running a business following one track, but I now want to change to a different track, but create a different
Mm.
story. How
Mm.
do we change stories in businesses when we've been ingrained in doing it this way before?
Mm. A lot of this is making me think, like, the project I'm currently on and a few projects I've been on recently, which is working with senior leadership teams to redefine the values,
Mm.
purpose, vision, as because they see that as a strategic lever. They want to say to new talent,
Yeah,
to existing talent, like, this is what we stand for. This is why we're here. And so we reach into the big bin of values and pull out words like, courage or innovation, whatever it is. And unless there is meaning and story behind that, it could just be words on a wall or on a
yeah,
PowerPoint slide. Humans are very much programmed to sit up straight when you hear someone say once upon a time. That's ingrained from an early age as a signal that it's time to listen.
yeah,
And so I use stories a lot in my work to make points about what I'm trying to say, because it really so the book Sapiens talks a lot about how humans are really good at storytelling,
yeah.
and it is one of the dominant kind of currencies that we have for communication, for
Mm.
connection, for community, and the ability of a leader to tell a good story, super critical in getting people on board.
Yeah, yeah. And do you know, there's something there about that word engagement as well, because once upon a time, are you sitting comfortably? You're opening up that mindset to think about the story, what's coming next. And I
Mm.
think we can all uh, rekindle that emotion of being back at school, listening to story time. And if you went back in society, as you said, Sapiens is that what that we talk about there in terms of how stories evolved and they communicated a purpose. and in business, often we sometimes have that story, but actually, um, I liken it to the campfire. You know, I uh, I was a scout many years ago, and the key that brought things back for me was sitting around the campfire. And I think in business, we often need to have our campfire stories. We need to
Mm,
sit around the table and talk about what got us here.
mm,
And where I disagree with Marshall Goldsmith when he says about what got you here won't get you there, I think actually what got you here gives you some basis of evidence to say, look, let's learn from what we've got and let's
mm,
carry the bits of our tradition forwards to do something else with. So I think
mhm.
we can go forwards with what got us here. But we need to make sure the campfire story is still alive. And if we need to
Yeah,
change, let's just recognize that what got us here has got some real power and merit in it, and we can do something with going in the future as well.
yeah. Like the change theory that I believe in is the transition away from hierarchy and command and control
Mm.
leadership into something more agile, responsive, like self-organizing, more flat. But the critical point to make there is hierarchy and traditional leadership served us well for a really long time because the world was predictable and because uh, um, it was rational, it was more logical.
Yeah, yeah.
And there are elements of hierarchy that I think still like hold true today. We're not going to throw the baby out of the bathwater. Decisions still need to be made within a certain group who have the right level of influence and authority and experience. And we, transparency, although I believe in defaulting to open,
Yeah,
there's a shadow side to transparency which can breed some mistrust.
yeah,
So we're not going to lose all of that. We're not going to lose the whole story. We're not going
mm,
to lose our whole identity. But sometimes it just needs a remix, a reframe for the world in which we find ourselves.
yeah. And interesting, isn't it? When you say that, I think there's something around. If we look at the world of branding, a lot of people see branding as being the pretty picture on the wall with the logo, but actually it's the story, it's the iceberg below the water that we need to work on because we've got to make sure we're totally aligned with our positioning in the marketplace. And I think something there when you talk about, how do you deal with that transition away from hierarchy and making the changes? We need to make sure that the business is aligned to what its common purpose is. And
Yeah,
therefore, we have to make sure that everybody's in alignment with the way we do things around here in the past, but also now. And we need to put that structure in place to enable us to adapt. And that's a big
yeah,
point that a lot of people forget about the structure to enable us to adapt for the future, to deal with what's coming at us.
yeah. And that's the work I do as an organization designer, put in that structure that's going to allow us to change and evolve as we go.
Okay.
So reorganization is more continuous than
Yeah,
every couple of years.
I love that. So look, we're going to come to the end of the podcast here, just in terms of time wise, and I think there's another conversation at some stage, Max. But I'd love to just to ask you a final question, if you don't mind. And that's question, in fact, two questions actually, possibly. And the first question is, let's just cast our minds back to when the young Max was starting out in business. You've gone to New York. What's the piece of advice you would give that young Max now, with what you now know, with hindsight? Because your gut feel, we talked about just now, probably told you something then. I wonder what you would tell yourself now.
Right. Oh, deep cuts, Phil. What would I tell myself now? Think I think New York is a very ambitious place. America is a very capitalist place, and I was in my mid-20s, and I wanted cash to burn on things I didn't need. And so at the time, I oriented towards profit, and that was the right thing for me at the time. And in the long run, this is a cliche, but in the long run, you realize that you do need to find purpose even over profit in order to make a sustainable
Yeah,
career happen.
Yeah.
Do what you
Yeah.
love is not the most groundbreaking advice that I could give anyone, but it is true.
But don't you think that's wonderful? I have a daughter who would love to go and live in New York. She wants to be involved in the fashion industry. She's set her sights on that, and as a father, I want to encourage her to do where her heart takes her. Um,
Yeah.
and I think one of the concerns I have, and I get emotional when I talk about this, one of the concerns I have is the fashion industry and what it construes there, and especially going to work in New York City, because exactly what you said there. It's capitalist, it's profit driven, it's about the new look, it's about spending money and uh, buying things to build your self esteem on the outside, whereas actually we should be looking on the inside.
Mm.
So I think your bit of advice there around purpose even over profit is really key, because we have to look at that. And, if I'm educating my 18-year-old daughter, and if she ever listens to this, I'd love her to take something away from that around building uh, building an intrinsic motivation, is what you said
Yeah.
earlier, around what is it I'm going in there for, and how can she's got an ambition of changing the face of fashion for good. And I think there's something there, what you say there about purpose even over profit, even in a capitalist society. So interesting when you go back and look at that now. There's lots of questions about how you would make that happen, but I think that the hook there, or the link there, is start with why.
Yeah.
Why is that important? And actually, from all the conversation we're having now, um, the conversation is important because that's the way society needs to change.
Yeah. My wife worked in fashion when we got to New York, but she was very specific. She wanted to work in sustainable fashion that could solve for the climate crisis. She wanted to move away from fast fashion. So even within that world, she found her meaning away from the ephemeral, superficial, like TikTok, Instagram world of fashion, to
Yeah.
something that actually held a greater purpose for her.
Mm.
And I think, you know, in any industry, someone can find that, but it's just about getting clear on what that is and why, the real longer term reason that they want to do it.
Yeah. I think that's true. I think that's a great thing, that longer term reason. Um, but I love asking that question about the advice you give yourself, because I think it does start to open up those channels of that's what I would have done, but actually that's what you do now as well.
Mm.
And I think that's the key bit. So let's come back to that word story, just to wrap up in that case.
Mhm.
Where does the story go next for you?
Yeah, big change in my life is I'm going freelance as of November. I'm breaking out on my own, and I'm looking forward to a little bit more flexibility over who I work with. Um, there's a non-profit I've been chatting to for a while that I want to do some pro bono work with. There are new collaborators that I want to learn from,
Yeah.
and new new experiences that I want to have. The trade-off there is certainty. I don't have a regular paycheck now, and
Yeah.
I'm no idea what that's going to be like. But it's at the very least, I'll have more time for parenting and woodworking, and at the very best, I'll be have more autonomy and direction and control over how I live my purpose and what I want to do in
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
So that's where the story goes next. I just signed my first freelance gig this morning, so
Oh,
things are looking up.
that's nice. That's nice. And I love that. And my urge to you would be to make sure you still pick up those woodworking tools, because it's very easy as a freelancer to get consumed by all this work coming in and
Yeah,
forget about the reason you're doing it in the first place. Um,
yeah,
and I think that's a really exciting place to be. But remember, the woodworking tools still bring you purpose.
absolutely. Great
That's
advice.
How would people find you? Obviously, it would be great to put that in the show notes at the end, but how would people find Max?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty easy to find. I don't think there are many Max Sathers in the world.
Okay.
Surname Sather. It's an old Norwegian name. And yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, quite active. So yeah, look me up, get in touch. Happy to help.
Perfect. Thank you. Max, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I'm sure there's lots of other questions we could have asked, but it's been a great meander through the world of purpose, psychological safety, understanding different ways of organizing organizations and designing organizations. So I love that. And there's some great takeaways there from some of the books you read and the information you put across there. So thank you, Max. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Phil. This was really fun. Really appreciate you
Thank you.
inviting me on and listening to what I have to say.
I look forward to doing it again.